Let's bring in Victor Gao. He is the director of the China National Association of International Studies. Victor, what do you expect to happen? What kind of ruling do you expect, and what will the reaction be following it?
I think we are expecting the decision from the arbitration tribunal based in Hague in a matter of hours. And I think this will be a major event in the history of UNCLOS and also in the history of maritime matters. China, from the very beginning, has taken a firm position of not participating in this arbitration, not be involved in this arbitration, and not recognizing the decision, whatever it may take, coming out of the arbitration tribunal. And China is firmly based on the principle that China has obtained a carve-out, that is an exemption, when China submitted a written document to the UNCLOS about not being involved in any arbitration about the sovereignty and territorial integrity of China in any maritime dispute. And I think this is a well-defined position. Many other countries, including major maritime nations, have also obtained the identical exemption. And if this particular tribunal, which China considers illegal, is going to make any decision which may have a direct bearing on China's sovereignty and territorial integrity in the South China Sea, this actually will be a major erosion of the legality of the UNCLOS itself. And it may even force China to consider withdrawing from UNCLOS. Now that UNCLOS does not have the United States present as a member state, if China ever decides to withdraw, which I hope it will not, then it will severely weaken the functionability of the UNCLOS system. And I do hope the tribunal itself will really consider all the factors and make a decision which will at least not have a negative bearing on what China is claiming about, and still leave the chance for China and the Philippines to engage in peaceful bilateral negotiation and diplomacy, which is the best way to solve any territorial dispute between the two countries. Therefore, we are all awaiting the decision coming out from The Hague very patiently. But the Chinese government has already declared whatever decision the Hague Tribunal is making will be a piece of scrap paper.
Let me get your thoughts on an op-ed piece written today by an international law expert who points out that in the 1980s, Nicaragua brought a case against the United States administration of then-President Ronald Reagan. The International Court of Justice accepted the case, eventually ruled against the U.S. The United States took a non-participation, non-acceptance stance, which of course dovetails with the stance we're seeing from China right now. So he argues that if the U.S. accepts the Hague's arbitration result and pressures China, it would be guilty of a double standard. And I want to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think in this particular case, the memory of the United States government seems to be highly and artificially limited. It completely forgets the Nicaragua arbitration case and all the efforts that the United States went through, including its veto at the United Nations Security Council and also obstruction to the General Assembly of the United Nations. The United States actually was required to pay a hefty amount of fine to Nicaragua. The United States exercised its own right and completely ignored that arbitration award. Now, if the United States considered it did the right thing to defend the national interest of the United States back in the Nicaragua case, how could the United States hold itself out as a country which is not yet a member of UNCLOS to insist that China has no other option but to accept the ruling, whatever it takes, out of The Hague today, and even threatens military action against China? Don't forget, China is not a rabbit, and China is fully armed, and the Chinese nation are fully determined to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, whatever bluffing from Washington it may take. And it will be suicidal if anyone in Washington, including especially in the Pentagon and the Pacific Command in Hawaii, even want to indulge in the fantasy that they can corner China by threatening military use against China. Let's talk about peace. Let's talk about decency and elegance of your own position rather than confusing yourself and the rest of the world with the double standards that you tend to indulge in, and even the posturing against China by threatening China with military weapons. The Chinese government even said that even if the United States sent all the 10 aircraft carrier battle groups into the South China Sea, China will stand firm on this matter of principle involving China's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Let me bring in ASEAN now. Philippines is an active member, as you know, along with Vietnam and Malaysia. They also have overlapping claims with China. With Duterte's willingness to hold direct discussions, do you think other member states may be more willing to hold talks with China to try and solve these disputes?
Now, I think if you look around the world, there are many cases of territorial disputes in the world, some deeply rooted in historical facts, some very much recently emerging. Now, the best way to deal with territorial disputes is absolutely through peaceful negotiation by the claimants directly. Therefore, as far as the South China Sea is concerned, China is happy to deal with the Philippines, which actually has more than 1,000 years of good neighborly relations with China on an equal basis to talk about what's the best way to get out of these territorial disputes. China identically wants to engage with Vietnam to talk about the territorial dispute. China wants to talk with Malaysia, for example, and any other claimants about this. Don't forget, China have altogether 14 land neighboring countries, and China have already signed the border treaties with 12 out of the 14. The only countries left behind is India and Bhutan, which is very much captive by India. Therefore, using the land boundary treaties as an example, we are confident that if China and all the other countries involved in the South China Sea dispute can engage in bilateral negotiations and peaceful negotiations, we will have a good settlement and solution for all the territorial disputes. Deng Xiaoping, many years ago, even advocated that these disputes should be put aside and the countries involved should be focused on common development. I think this still remains the best way out, and all the countries in the territorial dispute in the South China Sea should listen to the wisdom of the great saga like Deng Xiaoping, and also a focus on peace and stability and how to generate greater results for the people. Between China and the Philippines, we want to have peace and friendship with the Philippines, and we love the Filipino people, and we can deal with each other as brothers and sisters. We do not any intervention from other major countries which may actually have their own ulterior motive to insert themselves into these territorial disputes between China and the Philippines and China and Vietnam.